Right.
Then I have something to show.
Oh, that's good.
You won't be surprised, maybe.
Oh.
Sure, you won't be surprised.
What?
He was there.
Oh, he won't be. You have this thing. I mean, let me refamiliar. I mean, one was rather. Do you have? No.
I think. Do you have a
There was just some questions that I came up with that I thought maybe we could discuss. Do you have one of these, Rich?
Yeah, I have it.
Oh,
you give me.
And sort of random, but sort of in the vein of the youth movement and what and its relationship to critical theory.
Right.
I mean, so two has to do with. I mean, you've mentioned Rudi Dutschke at various times.
Should I say something about him?
I'd like you to. I mean, I found an article from Spiegel online, Revolutionary Who Shaped a Generation, and it talks about his...
No, I have something by his wife. She wrote a book about him, but I couldn't find it there. Karen can find it or somebody. So I couldn't bring that. But I found something here when Bloch died. I don't know if you... Ernst Bloch, yeah. I mean, he was partially responsible for the whole movement, but he was never a real member. He asked Horkheimer for money. He was in what is the Czech Republic today, or Bohemia, and he needed money to come to America, and he asked the Frankfurt School people, and I think before they came up with it, his publisher paid for it. So there were connections between them, but he was not a formal guy. He was a little bit older than the others, and so he was closely related to the Fromm family in Frankfurt. The young Fromm met him all the time. So, and then, he influenced Adorno and all of them, so he was the great guy in the back. And when he died in 1977, Rudi Dutschke then wrote something too, and from that text you can really see who he was. He came from East Germany, first of all, so he taught I have a little speech here by him in honor of Bloch. So he came from the BRD, that means the German Federal Republic. He came from the DDR, really, from the German Democratic Republic, and went over to the German Federal Republic. But he was critical of both of them, and so, Bloch had a strange career. He was the only one, I think, who belonged to the Communist Party at a certain time. Maybe Marcuse too. And so then he fled. He had to flee as a Jew and came to the States. And his second wife really fed him. His second wife was an architect. The first wife was a Catholic woman, and he loved her a lot. Then he married a Swiss woman, and it didn't work out, but I think he had a child from her. Then he married this third one, real practical, like Thomas More, he married a practical, down-to-earth type of person. And she went with him to the end of his life. That is, Carola, she edited this after his death together with another fellow. So, and she worked as an architect, and he worked as a caretaker in a high school. He cleaned up, for 12 years, he cleaned up a high school. And during that time, he wrote The Principle of Hope, which then had such a tremendous impact. So it had an impact on the religious people, Jürgen Moltmann and also Metz. They both became something like his sons. They were half his age, and they were his spiritual sons. And so both for the rest of their lives, they were influenced by him. He was a musician. He wanted really to become a composer and a conductor, so that was really the dream of his life. He died in a chair while he was listening to Beethoven, a very peaceful death. But he went back then, after he was in the States here. By the way, it took decades until that book came out here, The Principle of Hope, 3 volumes. But it was published several times in Europe in different languages. So then he went to East Germany, so the German Democratic Republic, and he became a professor in Leipzig. When we went to Leipzig, my God, and 2 or 3 years ago, I think, and nobody could remember anymore that he had even been there, which is strange. So he got alienated from that government over there. The students asked him once, if when Alternative Future 3 would become about a free society on the basis of economic basis, if then religion would still be necessary, or if they would still be there. And he said yes, and they took that very badly and denounced him to the government, and he had to leave, and he went to Tübingen, and in Tübingen, Moltmann and others took care of him. He was too old in order to teach, but they, made all kinds of contracts, and he wrote a lot in this Tübingen. Lived in a little apartment there. So that is, and he had a tremendous charismatic radiation all over the place. And so that is what he talks about. But it's in German, so it's a little bit hard to translate. But he says, for instance, here, Uri Dutschke says, Bloch is the expression of the negation of resignation, a lived principle of hope, so that he lived what he preached there in this book there. Then the lived socialistic position of self-transformation and the continuity of the upright walk. That was Bloch's formula very often. People are humiliated and they should learn the upright walk. So Rudi Dutschke saw in him the enfleshment, the incorporation of what socialism is really all about, not like East Germany, and so that went the wrong way. Just a few things there. So he talks also about the warm stream and the cold stream. There are, in Christianity, for instance, there is a warm stream. Jesus was very friendly and kind, but then he also could turn around very suddenly and become very rough, like with Peter, go behind me, Satan, after he had just said, on you I will build my church, and so on. So the mood swings, which went very fast back and forth, and so there is this cold thing, in terms of eternal hell and all kinds of things, and that warm thing of loving God and loving the neighbor and so on. And so the same thing in socialism as well. There is the warm stream and the humanism and the friendliness, but then, there is also the hard and the cold stream, and with Stalin, the cold stream, overwhelmed the warm stream. But just to continue, what are you doing in the situation which we are now? There's my daughter just called, and my little grandson is operated, but she told me that her bridesmaid, she got married there a few years ago, she works in Wall Street, and she gets 3 times the salary in bonuses, Now, she knows that she will be taxed out of this next year, and nothing will be left of it. And so she is angry, and so are all her colleagues, and so she said, Obama is losing people all the time, and so on. And I tried to make clear to her, that there are objective processes going on, and that Bush would not act very differently, because capitalism is breaking down. I mean, it's finished, and it's so hard for people to see that. I just told Dustin, people, there are several things which they don't understand, that this thing of incentive and the other thing of bailout, it's neither incentive nor bailout, it's a buy-up. That means the federal government buys up the banks and the industries, and that means nationalization, and it cannot be done otherwise. As a matter of fact, what people don't see is that if we could stabilize the stock market or whatever, or General Motors after 4 years or whatever, we could never go back to the free market. That means we could never tell them to self-regulate themselves or whatever, because then we would fall into a deeper depression than now, and plus the government has spent $3 trillion, $4 trillion, $5 trillion, and it runs out of people from whom we have borrowed $1 trillion, I heard today, from China alone. So there will be no people anymore to borrow, to give us any money, and the state will be out. That means all the measures which we can take now, in another collapse, we wouldn't have those things anymore. The unemployment would go up to 15% and 20%, and people would run around in the streets like they do in London now, and throw rocks into the banks and the Bank of England and so on, because the anger is growing and growing all the time, And what they don't see, is that they are the ones who are the subject of the federalization process. That means it goes over into federal government, and that is the property of all citizens. That means fundamentally all this money never belonged to these private people. They were stewards who had to take care of that in the name of the people, and they committed fraud against the people and stole it all. That is the crime which has been committed. And so the real owner, which is the community of citizens, takes back again what it gave to the stewards because the stewards have failed. All that is not seen, It's a reified type of a consciousness in millions and millions of people who are not able to make these connections. So when Bush talked about the owner nation, yes, now we become an owner nation because we all together will take back from the stewards who failed back to the nation again. And that is a very good development. Now, for all those who have no sense for the common good is hell. And, Lenin, Marx and Engels thought, the revolution could take place in the form of progressive taxation. And it is not even, Obama or whatever. So if we hadn't him, then it would be different or whatever. I mean, Bush's confession, they came to me and said, everything is collapsing. You have to federalize. And so I did it, he said. Against all what he and his class stood for, for all their lives, and their grandparents, dealings with the Nazis and so on. And now they had to do the exact opposite. So Americans the first time see that they don't construct reality, at least not all the way, but that it constructs itself. And that the government simply has to translate this to the people and make it clear. And at the moment, they are not making it clear to them. Maybe because they want to be too tender or they don't want to risk anything or whatever. But the American people are not told what is really going on, And it's not entirely strange to us because in the theory of democracy and so on, that was always somewhere in the textbooks, there. So about this whole, the churches talked about this, that the rich had to took that only as a loan or whatever and were supposed to take care of it in the name of all, and that was always there, but nobody ever took that seriously, I think. So that is Rudi Dutschke now. He personally, the most impressive thing which I know of him is he, in Berlin on Christmas, I don't know exactly which Christmas, he marched into the church there. There's a church in Berlin which has been bombed out by the Allies. And the church is still there. They left the ruin, but they added another church to the ruin. And so he went, with his group there. By the way, is Walter coming or is he still sick?
No, he's still sick.
Oh my God. What is it?
Some sort of walking flu.
Really?
Walking pneumonia or something.
Oh my God. Nevertheless, he marched in the church with his whole group and went to the pulpit and gave a sermon. He had a theological background. And he gave a wonderful Christmas sermon for people. They were shocked, all these bourgeois characters. In Germany, only Christians are all bourgeois, only the bourgeoisie is really Christian. And the workers, I told you that when I came back to Germany and to democratize it, that with Walter Dix and Eugen Koger, we founded this in Hessen, this Christian Democratic Party, and it was supposed to be Christians and workers together. And it failed. And Adenauer then put the bourgeois Christians together, Protestant and Catholic, and the workers left again. But the workers, are suspicious of the bourgeois and don't believe their Christianity, and the bourgeoisie is skeptical of the workers and so on. So this Merkel, who is now in London, she is Christian Democrat, and she represents the Christian Party, but a bourgeois Christian Party. So the Centre Party was only Catholic. So there was some progress. Now he put Catholics and Protestants together, but they were both only bourgeois people. And the working class went over to the Social Democrats or the Communistic Party as long as they were not outlawed. Okay, now Rudi Dutschke was assassinated, as you know. He was assassinated by a worker, a young worker. He did not die right away. He lived another year or something like that. And
10 years, 12 years.
12
he died in
years.
19... So in 68 he was shot, and in 79 he died of complications.
And he married an American woman, right? who is now, I think, here in this country in the meantime. And she wrote that book, so maybe I can find it for the next time. And though there is this one clash with Habermas, where Habermas called him a red fascist. And so they used that name for the communists in East Germany, Stalinists, and the Stalinists in Russia. But then, I think after the assassination, Habermas took that back again and said he had been wrong about it, and it wasn't true. And so also the thing here, that doesn't look like Stalinism, but that looks like a rather genuine form of socialism.
I'm really curious about what, I mean, I see that he had these big public talks, and they even involved prominent sociologists, political scientists. I think Ralph Dahrendorf was there. Yeah. What were they? I mean, besides maybe just radical social change, what were they talking about as far as issues that were different from what maybe SDS and the student movement was doing here?
I mean, there were so many. I mean, they were Bakuninists to a large extent. They were not even, Marxists. And on the campus too, they were all Bakuninists, and they drove the FBI, nuts, because the FBI always looked for leaders, and of course, Bakuninists, anarchists have no leaders. The reports from London, they said, these are anarchists, and so anarchists are part of that group. And anarchists, Bakunin had a very sad time because he was outlawed by the Communist Party and by the Social Democratic Party. So everybody has something against anarchy. There is not even a word for archy, which would be the positive thing, because they are all archists. And so they have only a definition for anarchists, but not for archists, because that's what everybody is. So in one case or the other, they all have this authority thing. And Bakunin was a nobleman, in England, and wrote this famous book about God and the state. And at that time, everybody read this book here. And then he made a revolution in Dresden. And who was a member of that revolution? Richard Wagner. Richard Wagner was a Bakuninist revolutionary, and kept some of that revolutionary thing also later on in his music still. And Hitler was then connected with the Wagner family, and there were certain anarchistic elements also in the fascist party, but which Hitler certainly did not condone. It's not exactly SDS. I think it is some kind of a attempt of a genuine socialism, and it was something similar happened in the end stages of these Eastern European countries. There were masses of people who didn't like Stalinism, but they wanted to have a new socialism. And I think that Rudi Dutschke is a representative of this new socialism. Very often it went back to the young Marx, the writings of the young Marx, the Parisian writings, and was turned against the older Marx of the Capital, who became more authoritarian in a certain way, and rougher. I mean, the cold stream of socialism came through with Marx in later years, maybe because of his disappointments with the workers, and it didn't come as he wanted it. And so, but the young Marx was the real humanistic one, and so we had in Budapest, of course, there was a group of them, and the Praxis group, and so it is more this type of a direction which he represented in a very intelligent way. He was a very. I always criticize the students here that their theory was too weak. They didn't know really where they were, what the country was like, and that accounts for the horrible shock which they felt when the students were shot by the National Guard. They thought they were in a free country or whatever. They had horrible illusions about this country. So it's the same wrong education which makes for this maladjustment now, that people cannot understand what's really happening. The students had a lot of this. They wanted to have a new religion, new love, new politics. And they thought, of course, that was all the old stuff, that bourgeois pants. but they thought it was free in that sense that one could make this change without violence and so on. And then they suddenly, felt this. And many, some became insane, like the fellow is still sitting up there in the state hospital. And others resigned, resignation, and just followed the system. The students in general went back into what Weber called the iron cage and have adjusted to it. And this is why it's relatively quiet. How long it remains quiet, how long you can repress, that longing in younger generations to break out of what is and not to become old and resign yourself that just nothing can be done about it or whatever. So
I was watching one of Rudy's speeches.
Yeah.
And of course, you're from Jurist, but I heard that he kept saying Aufklärung a lot.
Aufklärung, yeah, right.
Enlightenment. So why?
He was an Enlightenment man. So, that is, the bourgeois Enlightenment is behind that. The bourgeois Enlightenment was equality and brotherhood and justice and so on. And the theory is that the bourgeoisie has betrayed this. And that's why I mentioned, that the Marxist is self-critical, liberal, or that, it's self-critical liberalism may be the definition of Marxism. That means the bourgeoisie as a class betrayed its own promises, and therefore a new estate, the fourth estate, has to take over these promises, and they can only be realized in the post-bourgeois period. So, which in our language would mean only when the federalization has taken place all around, then it would be possible for a new socialism to realize this égalité, fraternité, and liberté, which the bourgeoisie promised. So the socialistic enlightenment is simply a continuation of the bourgeois enlightenment. That's why the socialists in Marx, they would always say, the great bourgeois enlightenment, or the great, also the great bourgeois revolution, because it was an important step. But it was followed up right away by commune upheavals, So in 1831 you had an upheaval, and then in 1870 another upheaval where the fourth estate, which had been forgotten, broke through then very fast. And that's why Marx went 1848, he went to Frankfurt, and hoped that there would be an alliance between the bourgeoisie and the fourth estate, and that together they would overthrow the nobility and so on. But instead, the bourgeoisie allied itself with the nobility instead, and that prepared fascism. That's why Germany took that turn to fascism finally. So Rudi Dutschke is a very interesting and also very tragic, very youthful type of a man in his thinking and so on. So only a few lines that I wish I could translate it there, but a few lines shows the dialectics of his thing, how he moves from where he comes from, the Democratic Republic over to the Federal Republic, and what their attitude is toward Bloch. He has the feeling that East Germany didn't understand him fully and had not treated him well. And then there was Kohl was in power at that time. And he thought Kohl was Americanized, had become a bourgeois, American bourgeois. And Kohl, he had his doctorate in history. He promised a few months before Bloch died, he said he wanted to talk with him about what concrete utopia means or so, but he never got to it. But he recognized Bloch as a great man and so on, but Rudi Dutschke thought, they don't really mean it, what they say, don't understand what they say. Metz, visited him a lot, and they were sitting for hours and hours in the dark church in Tübingen and discussing eschatology. And Bloch thought that the real essence of Christianity is expressed in "I shall make all things new," or the new heaven and the new earth. That was the arch Christian message, and he was completely on the side of Metz and not on the side of Küng, because Küng, that was salvation in down payments, so through the centuries, all these new paradigms and so on, and the whole thing never comes. So Bloch was very much, and Rudi Dutschke too, very much on the Met side and not on the King side, and it's still going on today like that. So what else can we say about Rudi Dutschke?
I mean, what was one thing that was
humanistic
interesting,
socialism, I think that's what it was, you know.
I mean, both in America and in Germany, both student movements sort of split in a way, and both gave rise to these sort of radical movements, the Red Army faction or the Weathermen.
Meinhof group.
Right. Meinhof, Bader, Holger, Mainz.
Okay, I mean, go through your questions there. We can, you know.
He
did not belong to the Bader-Meinhof group, you know.
Right. So why? Do you think that this says something particular about how the student movement was because it was made up of mainly maybe petty bourgeois students or something like that, that they get, like you said?
I mean, it had a predecessor, right? It was the third youth movement already. Mm-hmm. There had been ones before the First World War with the same ideas, you know, about new love and new politics and new religion. And also, you know, like our Boy Scouts, you know, going into the Alps and looking for the rose there and all kinds of romantic. It was a romantic movement, a lot of romantic ideas. There was also a left romanticism. You know, you could ask if Dutschke maybe, you know, belonged to that left romanticism. But so then there was a second movement. Well, I mean, the first youth movement was then swallowed up by the First World War, and you know, youth became nationalistic, and then they killed each other off. The movie which we wanted to see there about this Christmas shows some of that. You know, that it was only possible because these soldiers had gone through that youth movement, but the power of nationalism was so unbelievable that they were overwhelmed by it and then shot each other. And you have that in an intellectual level too. Fritz Haber, you know, who was this guy who got ammoniac out of the air, and he had thought internationally. You know, he wanted to have food for all of humanity. But as soon as this nationalistic thing comes up, then even the biggest intellectuals become suddenly nationalistic. You know, he had discussions with Einstein. You know, and Einstein was this cosmopolitan guy before the First World War, and then even into the Second World War, and then suddenly he writes that letter to Roosevelt, you know, that there was a new possibility of a new super weapon, and then repents it again and regrets it and writes a letter to him, 1945, not to use that thing under all circumstances, it must not be used. And Roosevelt died. He never read the letter, but Truman must have read the letter, but didn't listen to it. So the power, you know, of nationalism, and then it started again, the same movement after the First World War, after 1917, and some of them were religious, some of them were humanistic, and so on. But the same again, you know, to break out of their bourgeois pants, and you are right, they were not working class very often, they were bourgeois sons and daughters, and then they were sucked up, you know, by the Phalange and by Mussolini's youth movement and by Hitler Youth, and suddenly they found themselves again on the battlefield, and they killed each other off again. It's an unbelievable tragedy. So then the Frankfurt School had a great influence, you know, for this youth movement, which went from Japan through the States to Rome and Frankfurt, and Marcuse was the guru here who had a great influence with his speeches and so on, and argued against Reagan in public, you know, for quite some time. And then, of course, Reagan changed. You know, he had been a labor union leader and changed over to the neoliberalism, from Roosevelt liberalism to neoliberalism. Like the priest here, Coughlin, you know, he was also a Roosevelt man, like Obama. And then he was not satisfied with this and went to the fascist side. And that is our danger too. You know, there could be people who are disappointed with Obama and go to the fascist side. That would be a possibility. Nevertheless, there was then a split occurred. We discussed that already between the Frankfurt School and the youth movement. So first they were influenced by it, and they read Fromm, and they read Marcuse over here, and Adorno, particularly in Europe, and they were fascinated and stimulated by it. And then they were disappointed, mutual disappointment. And what was it about? I think one thing was the violence. The students, got in conflict with the police, and Molotov cocktails, flew back and forth, and so that was not really in the cards for the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School also thought they were critical of East Germany and Pankow government, and they thought that the East would take advantage of destabilization in the West, and the youth movement was destabilizing, so that was another reason. But then the youngsters were disappointed too. So we had this thing, the two women who danced topless in Adorno's classroom because the critical theory was not sensuous enough, materialistic enough, and these two socialistic PhD candidates of Adorno agitated at the same time that it was not revolutionary enough. On the other hand, Adorno and Horkheimer thought that the youngsters had become positivists without noticing it. That means that they fell into this metaphysics of what is the case, and that they acted, to a large extent, very much like those bourgeois parents whom they fought against. And I had one aspect which I experienced again and again, that was the attitude toward girls. So one thing was, new love, and of course freedom of the genders and so on. But when you really looked how they treated their girls, some of the girls really loved them, and they went with them. They were in the house here, and then they went to Canada, and the girls went with them, and usually the girls came back very disappointed because how rough they had been treated by them and beaten and so on. So they became too similar to that what they were fighting, and that is always a danger, that you assimilate to the opponent. Even in the concentration camp that happened, the whole thing of the mimicry that prisoners, Jewish prisoners, imitated the language or the gestures of the SS-men. Assimilation as a way to escape somehow, and so that the critical theorists observed that gliding into positivism, and they were quite critical of this. So then they wanted to take over the Frankfurt Institute for Social Research there, which my God will visit them. He wants to talk with Hannes and some others, and he wants to stay there maybe 4 weeks and work in their library or whatever. So it's the same, that institute, but Habermas took a strange position there. He then warned the students that the police would come, and the students never came, never occupy it. And these same students who wanted to occupy it then got their doctorate later on and became scholars in that same institute and wrote about right-wing extremism, and they did take it over, under one, what is his name there, I forget his name all the time. This Andi Ludwig von Ludwig von, he was a real strange type of thing. I mentioned him already because he came, it was second generation, or let's say like Habermas generation, and he came from a military family, the old German military family, which was quite a shock, for him to convert to this different position. And his father was the head of the German Navy, and he went to Reims, the city of Reims in France, and met Eisenhower and signed the surrender of the German fleet. And then, with the agreement of his family, Friedeberg, von Friedeberg, he then committed suicide, because he could not endure it, that he had already signed it in the First World War, and he could not endure so he could not survive this. And Ludwig himself took a German U-boat from Le Havre, and under Allied bombardments or whatever, he drove this U-boat all along the North Sea coast and through the Channel to Bremerhaven, and brought it back to the German government and he didn't have any people to do that with, so he took people out of prison in the harbor and put them on the boat and trained them what to do with it. If you have ever seen a German U-boat, what that looks like inside, it's a little death box, you know. There's one in Chicago. You can look at it and go through it. But nevertheless, he put those guys together. We had taken out of prison and taught them a little bit. And with them, he was diving and coming up again and diving, and was with all the Air Force and all the Allied ships. You know, it was in April or so. The war had not yet ended. You know, and everybody was hunting for these things. You know. When I was taken a prisoner, then in May, there were still German U-boats, and so I went from Oran on a Liberty ship, and there were about 40 Liberty ships, and suddenly 2 German U-boats, you know, the snorkels came up out of the water, and there was alarm. All 40 ships signaled, and there was a horrible panic, and the prisoners were put along the railing so that the U-boat commanders would see that these are German prisoners and wouldn't shoot. They didn't know what a German U-boat commander was. They would have shot all of them with all the prisoners, you know. But they were on the way to Argentine already, probably with half of the gold of the German Empire, and went to their old Nazi friends over there. There was even the suspicion that Hitler may have gone that way, you know, but quite a lot of Nazi leaders got away. So they were just on the way. They didn't want to shoot anybody anymore. And so, thanks be to God, otherwise we would have to swim then over to Norfolk. Okay, so that is Friedeburg. You know, we talked already, you know, what a shock that was for this second generation of Germans. So they were not Jews anymore, and they had been raised, you know, under Nazism, and suddenly there appears a guy like Horkheimer and Adorno, you know, and they teach philosophy, and it was an unbelievable experience. So Habermas went through that, Friedeburg went through that, and quite a lot of people, and it was a very enthusiastic thing, with some suspicions, you know. Friedeburg was accepted by Horkheimer, but Habermas was not, and we mentioned already that he was not religiously musical. And I told you that 3 volumes in the last chapter now, to correct it, that it is a very, very Jewish thing, you know, in terms of, they are assimilated Jews and nonconformist Jews, but what they kept, you know, from Judaism is enormous. So I just in the last chapter, so last 2 or 3 chapters, I bring Tillich in. Tillich was their friend. They were also in contact with Rudolf Bultmann, and so they had contact with all kinds of theologians. And Karl-Heinz Haag was somebody who had come out of St. Georgen, which is the Jesuit center in Frankfurt, and he joined them and left the Jesuits, but they put him up, you know. He was responsible in every seminar meeting. He spoke Greek, you know, and Latin, and he would translate the church fathers for them, and so on. So they were very interested for this thing, and Habermas seemed to have no sense for that. And that was one thing, but there is another tradition also, that he was too revolutionary for them. Because the attitude of all Frankfurt School people is, it depends if you are revolutionary or if you are rescuing, you know, depends always on the situation in which you are. So under fascist conditions, they would ask for revolution. But under liberal conditions, they would say, here we can maybe try to rescue some of the art, rescue some of religion, and so on and so on. And so what I concentrated on was what's called translating type or inverse type of theology, namely that as we go on with secularization, all the people are disappointed about Obama now because of stem cell and abortion and so on, but this secularization cannot be stopped. So if on the other hand there's something good in religion and it helped, you know, us to be humanized to some extent, then of course one should ask if one cannot rescue some of the semantic or semiotic material or potential of religion into a secular form, into secular discourse. So like Obama was not a religious person, he was a totally secular person, but then he saw in Chicago, you know, what the churches did in the slums and how they worked and so on. And it was in Chicago where he where he converted, if you want to, but he remained a secular man. So what in the future you will see, it will be a totally secular society, but some of the people will have a humanistic type of motivation, and others will have a religious motivation, and on the surface you may not even see that. You had with Dieter Hennig, you know, I just found out from somebody accidentally that he was a Lutheran. But the very fact that I couldn't find out, we were good friends, what he was, but he went home, and he told me, a few days before his death, he said, I was in Germany with my grandchildren, and I went one way, they went another way, but he didn't tell me where he went. He went to his old hometown and met with people who had been confirmed with him in the Lutheran faith in order to, 40 years ago, or whatever when it was, and so he was a Lutheran, but he went to the Baptist church a lot and danced with them and so on until he got a heart attack almost. And then it was a battle priests who gave him the last rites in the end, whom he had for 6 years. He had supported him financially and so on, so that he could go to the seminary. And so, it's somehow, Dieter appeared as a completely secular man, Even Connie Lowe, when somebody came in and says, I've been an atheist forever, he said, I have also been an atheist, in spite of the fact that he was an army chaplain for many years. So, and somebody came in, and a priest or whatever said, I'm a priest too, in spite of the fact that Protestants have no priesthood. It is, sometimes when you have an identity, you may have a hard time in the States. So if you are open, and you look as if you had no identity of yourself, then you get through. That's the best way to go through it. But it may also be, an ecumenical type of a tendency to be everything for all people. One thing Dieter was, he was friendly. He was kind, and he prayed, by the way, he said he was a prayer specialist. But there was no trace of that neither, I mean, he couldn't have made it. He couldn't have $250,000 income with prayer studies, I mean, it took me 40 years to get Brecht to our theater there,
I just met a commune member of that doctor, was Roger or something.
Yeah, right.
And she said that she it sent her on these missions to rescue animals, and she said, I was in Dr. Henniker's office all the time, and I said, this guy who died, he's told us all about him.
Okay, let me tell you something about this Roger guy. Because, these individual cases can somehow show us what the culture is doing, which is something different, from individuals or what. And a real tough type of force. I discussed in 2 classes, this issue that women have to shave. Women have to shave in this society. In the Nazi society, women didn't shave. In Eastern Europe, where I taught, women didn't shave. But now, everybody has to shave. Now, there is no pope who said you have to shave. There is no president. There is no law, nothing. But every girl who would not conform to this would have a hard time on the marriage market, obviously. So that means culture, what is it really? It's a second nature, as Aristotle would say, and it is tougher than nature in terms of the pressure. The nature dictates the law of gravity, and we better obey it and don't jump down from the roof or whatever. The same thing is also, as far as nature is concerned, it has all the consequences, culture, if you do not obey that second nature. Nevertheless, where were we? Where did we start with? I wanted to talk about this Roger guy there, so I met him early on here, and we had discussions. I always thought that this behaviorism was leading us to alternative future number 1, a totally administered society, and I'm still convinced of that. At that time, he was a Skinnerian. He had studied under Skinner himself still, and they lost once. He told me they lost $10,000 in the department, and they didn't even notice it. That means they were paid by the army to transform peaceful accountants into aggressive Marines in a much shorter time than this ever had happened before. And because of this success, they were paid a lot. And so I discussed that too, that you should be open, for other schools of thought. And they fired a Freudian then. I was here already when there were still 2 Freudians there, I think, and both of them were fired. So they said, they couldn't make it if they would dissipate their forces in different schools. They had to concentrate on one school. And so he did this. He was the chair of the psychology department. A very nice fellow. One day he went home to his mother, a Mennonite mother. He came from a Mennonite background. And the mother asked him, "Son, what are you doing?" And he said, "I am studying the relationship between pain and anger." And the mother said, "Your grandfather talked about that all the time." And so Rogers came back and said, if my grandfather knew this already, why the hell do we have to kill all these rats and put them into the Skinner box or whatever and all that torture, And so then we cooperated with each other. One day we went into that building there, which, it's near the Henniger building there, and we let all the rats go and all the doves, let them fly out of the window until the police came. But they were all gone. They were all liberated already. But Roger had trouble with Dieter, because one day Roger told his students in the introduction course they should go home and take a nap and then study what happens to them. And then they should build a birdhouse and they should observe the birds, because they should not, put some animal into this unnatural situation with electrodes and food supply and whatever. That's not a rat. I mean, a rat which you put in the Skinner box is not a rat anymore. The sex partner is missing, the enemy is missing. So all the markers of the environment of a rat are not there except the food. And the food is manipulated, So therefore he thought one should observe animals in the real world. And he has a commune here still functioning, where he has horses and cows and students too, whom he taught that. But when he got this revelation from his mother, he wasn't such a good behaviorist anymore. And so they made him some kind of an extraordinary professor, but he couldn't write anymore. The journals didn't take his stuff anymore. But he went on, and was a very critical person, and so, well, not a critical theorist, but in his own way, he turned against his own school. I mean, I think he remained a behaviorist, but what he really became, he had no language, really, to say what he wanted to say, That means he had a language which belonged to instrumental rationality, but he had no language for communicative rationality, in spite of the fact that this is what he was doing. And so, in that sense, he was a rather tragic fellow. He's retired, and still alive, and is doing his things. So that was Roger. Yeah, it's good that he comes up again. Good fellow. Okay. Any other question from you? So we have only Dutch.
Unless we want to talk about them.
Well, just go through one after the other. Just tell us what.
I mean, I don't know if you guys, you've probably heard this, Dustin. Adorno had this dislike for protest songs that were turned into popular, or when popular music takes protest songs. Why? What's his view on that? So if Bob Dylan turns the Hurricane into a song about.
I mean, in the background there is this notion, of affirmative and negative culture, and it is possible that something was negative, and that means critical toward the reference point is civil society, antagonistic civil society, and so there is negative art, there is negative religion, which is critical of this, and then there is affirmative art, which affirms what is the case anyhow. That means a religion which becomes positivistic, songs which become positivistic, which meant at the same time it becomes untrue. That means it conforms to the untrue conditions in the actual society. And it is possible, when he sees somebody changing from one thing to the other, that's what he had against jazz, too, He thought that it was too affirmative, or too resigning, or whatever.
But that it paraded that it was liberation. It claimed to be liberation,
right,
but in fact it was affirmative.
And it was developed by the black people, and it looked like a liberation thing. Yeah, that's true. But I think the main thing is, these concepts of negative culture or affirmative culture, they would, hit against every type of poem or music piece or theater piece and so on, which would be affirmative or which would be positivistic. They even criticized Brecht, that they were positivistic elements, or that in Marx, they're positivistic elements, and so, or that the youth movement, which turns against civil society but then behaves very much as the society would behave, So I think Marcuse has these concepts too. I think they all have them in common in Löwenthal too. That helps a lot. And when they talk about the untruth of music, what they really mean is a music which is march music or whatever, which conforms, to what is the case. We have something in Plato, already. It's a little Platonic left over, where Plato, would forbid certain types of music because it emphasized what the Sophists did already. That means it supported civil society and it weakened the state. So for him, the ideal was the state, the truth was the state. He wrote a book about the state. And so that was the ideal, and what went on in civil society was destructive. He saw that civil society had developed between the family and the state in Athens, and that this civil society was destroying the state. So his whole philosophy is an attempt to rescue the state. And there are Platonic elements also in the Soviet Union, So the Soviet Union repressed civil society, and then what the neoliberal counter-revolution did, it unleashed it again, and with it, of course, that nationalism, which really did the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia in. So there is this problem which we face now too, what to do with civil society. That means what to do with the bourgeois. What to do with the bourgeois. If you let him have profit, he may produce tools, he may, and if you don't have that bourgeois creep who can follow his own selfishness, then you may not have nails enough or hammers enough or whatever, as it was really the case. So the issue is, how to let the guy eat, eat the grass or have his profit and then milk him. But what happens if you let him go, as we see now? If you let him go and say, you can eat as much as you want to, but you have to suddenly he collapses, he commits suicide. And that is why George Soros, who is one of the billionaires, wants to have government control. And he thinks why it went so wrong in Eastern Europe is that that the states were too weak. The corporations moved in, and the states did not know how to handle them. So they robbed everything, and I saw them in Kiev and everywhere in the hotels, And then they went back again. And
the states were strong before 1989. The states were strong enough before 1989.
Yes, right, yeah, but they were helpless.
Maybe not the right state.
Yeah, right. They were helpless, as soon as the meltdown happened, and they, so that's why they went back to some form of socialism again, or why the struggle is going on. And in Croatia, there where the Ustaša even took over the hotels and everything, and people now say no pensions, and whatever neoliberal is doing, Okay, so that, as far as Adorno is, now music was his dimension. So his mother, Catholic, was a singer, and the aunt was a piano player, or it was vice versa, and they lived in Frankfurt, close to that Jesuit place there, outside of. I was stuck there once during the bombardment, the British bombardment. I was in a train, and they bombarded me all around. It was very close to Adorno's home. And then came from a similar, they lived at the Main River. They had a nice house at the Main River, so both of them come from this. And so Adorno, already very early on was deeply involved in music and had a tremendous sensitivity. I mean, there's innumerable things about sociology of music, philosophy of music, And that the New York Times, when he died, said just he wrote something about a jitterbug or whatever. It was ridiculous and shameful, I mean, they obviously didn't know more or whatever. Yeah.
This is something reading Marcuse does the same thing. I'm very confused on. They're very quick to judge new music as horrible and derogatory, but they embrace what was popular music 100 years ago in the same system. I don't understand this willingness. This whole thing confuses me. I don't.
Yeah. Figaro was condemned when it came out as exciting the youth, and now today Figaro is.
Okay, so what you have to see is underlying, the theory of revolution. So Beethoven, was a revolutionary bourgeois musician, and so was Mozart. So Mozart had all kinds of trouble with the nobility, with the emperor or whatever. They were Maecenas, they paid him and so on, but they had a horrible time with them to really write what he wanted to write. So these composers belonged to the rising bourgeoisie. So but then when they made it finally in Paris, and they had made it a century before that when they killed Charles I, the king, and hanged him, and so then of course when the movement wins, then they become conservative. Now they want to preserve their own power. So therefore they will make a different music when they are rising and rise against the feudal lords and so on, and they will make another music when they are now in power and want to stabilize. But what you have in music, you also have in sociology. You have Comte, Auguste Comte, and who talks about social dynamics and social statics. So when they were still in the revolutionary phase, they were all for social dynamics. But when they were then later on, after they won, from Comte to Parsons, then they are for social statics. And so what Parsons did for 40 years, and what Luhmann did too, was engaged in social statics, building the system, the action system, and so on and so on. And only the students forced him, the rebellious students forced Parsons finally to refine social Darwinism and develop some kind of evolutionary theory in a few weeks, just in order to escape the embarrassment to the students. But his whole life work was social statics. So I think when you see all aspects of culture, religion, all the religion downtown is bourgeois religion, except the cults, on the north side, that's something else, but all the denominations, And Luther and Calvin were already on the Protestant right from the very beginning. While the Methodists, the Mennonites and the Amish and so on were all the Protestant left. So if you see what goes on in the basis, then it's more understandable what Marcuse and so on want. So,
But doesn't, like Bob Dylan, these same people go through that same process that Beethoven do? Their first songs were revolutionary. They're trying to overthrow.
Yeah.
So they have a problem.
It's still critical.
Part of Adorno's critique is that they become commodified. They commercialize. They're easily commodified, commercialized because they're simple. They have little hooks. Everyone can memorize them. The next person who wants to be successful doesn't have anything coming organically out of himself. He has to go back and look what was successful before. Because if that was a success, in order to make another successful song, according to Adorno, it has to be very similar, which might be 4/4 time tempo, whatever you want to call it. It has to be very similar, chord progression, whatever. It's slightly different, what Adorno calls ornamentation. Therefore, markets determine what the music is, not the musician.
But isn't that did that really change from the time of Beethoven? Is Beethoven not still trying to find an audience to listen to his music? Is he not?
Certainly, but how do you market it? That's a big difference with Schoenberg. Schoenberg can be marketed. I just did this lecture last week, by the way, or 2 weeks ago. Same thing with jazz. When you got into the 70s and jazz almost completely died out in the late 60s and 70s because he couldn't market it. You can't market free jazz. No one wanted to listen to it except for jazz musicians. And so in order for jazz to survive, it had to remarket itself, become recommodified in the 80s. And now that's exactly what it's doing. Jazz musicians are just happy to be alive.
Isn't that what we do with classical music, though? This is...
to a certain degree.
This is filled glass now. This is...
to a certain degree it becomes a commodity, but even what Adorno would say is that within the music it has to have some sort of internal development. And popular music has no internal development. It's the same thing over and over and over again.
Isn't that just the popular music of the day, and we're just in a new day?
Well, I mean, it could be, but I mean, the whole idea that with classical music there was a development, moving from Baroque into classical and into the Romantic period and whatever. I mean, you have popular music, you have no internal development.
You do though.
What? I mean, what's the internal development? I mean, honestly,
in the 50s is totally different from the music today.
Exactly.
What is it?
It is.
No, it's not.
Listen, I mean, what you don't listen to on the radio, I can go get your CDs and tons of little indie groups I listen to that are completely different.
I can play Beethoven and Bach for a worker, and they say the same thing.
Well, there's the same worker. I mean,
popular
music of the 50s, popular music of today, it's so much the same. The ornamentation is different. That's why it sounds. That's why it appears to the particular person that it's different. But at heart, at essence, it's the same time signature, same tempo, same chord progression, same everything, same messages.
It's the same thing that happened with classical music. This reeks of elitism.
No, it's not the same thing with classical music.
Not to mention, you're comparing a 50-year time span of popular music to, what, 300, 400 years of classical music?
Well, exactly. But if you take a Bach into a Beethoven,
and what year was Bach around? What was Bach?
Bach was, he died in 1750. Born in 1785, died in 1750.
When did Beethoven?
Beethoven was born in 1770, died in 1827. Okay. So, I mean, you have a massive difference between these two, between Bach and the point of his music and Beethoven and his point of his music. And Bach, I mean, obviously was... the way he composed things is very different the way
that stuff is there.
Beethoven did, but Mozart was the bridge in many ways. But there's some development there. Part of Adorno's point is when you listen to popular music, there's no development whatsoever. Now, I don't necessarily agree with
you mean no development in the song that
within the music itself.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But that applies to the protest song is simply a radical sounding thing set to the same bebop music.
Exactly, and it's the ornamentation, what he calls ornamentation, is different. Now, I love Rage Against the Machine, you know what I mean? But I can go back into the 50s and 60s and see where, the whole trace the development of where Rage Against the Machine.
But you can trace the development for Beethoven, right?
Well, you can
see where he comes from, right? You can trace his influence, and that's what you're doing with popular music. I mean, this is a big thing. Is this just reeks of elitism from an upper class guy? There's no
I don't
think so. I think because when he's talking about classical music, the composer himself was yes, he could be influenced, but he was behind the music. The music sounded like him. It was unalienated music. Take India Ari. She just put out her second or third album, whatever. She talked about her first one. She says, look, I love the songs I did, but it wasn't me. The market dictated what I had to do. The market, that means business dictated what he had to do.
That doesn't represent all of them. There's tons of artists who write their own stuff.
Yes, but we're talking about popular music who's on the popular level.
Well, even Bob Dylan wrote, some of his early stuff, not so much because it was just folk music, everyone did the same 5 songs. But later stuff, he wrote most of it. This is him. This is his representation. You look at something like Subterranean Blues, which is just so completely different from anything you had coming before. And it's a representation of him. This is the same steps are happening here. Nothing new is happening. Beethoven and Bach still wrote to do operas and do performances. If they weren't embraced by audience, they ran to problems. And that's what Mozart, Mozart ran into that problem. People didn't accept his work. And suddenly he's playing.
Nobody will listen to this, right?
He's playing his little.
Now, what about the content of these things in relationship to the structure of society? We're sociologists here. Right.
Lots of the early 60s stuff, especially the 60s stuff, was in revolution against the
So it was critical of what's going on in society. Yeah.
Lots of the stuff.
Right. That's what we are interested in.
Yeah, but even Adorno would say, like you said with the 60s here, it's critical of what's going on, but there's no theory behind it. It's emotion, you know what I mean? Something's going wrong in society, something, but nothing specifically, you know what I mean? So if you listen to the lyrics of it, yes, I think they're right. Their heart was in the right place. There's something terribly wrong, thus the need to protest. But it's theory deficiency. What is totally wrong? You know what I mean? They were killing in Vietnam or whatever.
My lack classical musical knowledge, I know a little bit, but not much. What's the theory behind Beethoven's work?
Well, Beethoven's work, the whole Bourgeois Revolution behind Beethoven's work.
Liberté, égalité, and Mozart was a Freemason too, which he was a Catholic and a Freemason, so they had a critical attitude toward the nobility. I mean, you see it in the operas too, what role they play, how ironical it is, when a prince or whatever appears. So
Idomeneo, King of Crete, the whole thing.
So in that sense, that's what we mean with negative culture, which is opposed to or affirmative, when it makes its peace with the reality as it is and resigns itself. So what are the songs, the gospel songs of the black people? What is are they?
Well, that almost always has a content of something which will come after.
Right.
So this is not focused on that which is.
Okay.
It's focused on that which.
But even now,
that we have to look at.
But that's the
what
classical,
is what.
right? That's the classical Marxist and even Malcolm's critique of that is y'all got to stop singing and start swinging. You know what I mean? Quit singing about what's to come and start changing something now. I mean, that's a typical Marxist.
And I don't know if Beethoven had a theory. If he had read all the encyclopedias and really knew what the bourgeoisie wanted. Maybe that's not so much the task of a musician, but if the content and the form of his work is really critical to that what is going on. That means these feudal lords who sleep the first night and so on, the humiliation which people suffer under the feudal system and serfdom and so on. So is there something in that music which negates that, obviously? And that could be done probably without having, the whole theory behind it, but
see that. So you mentioned Rage Against the Machine. That's a band that's doing that exact thing.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So when Beethoven put Schiller, to music.
Yeah, Schiller, yeah.
Is it the same as putting a protest song to music? Is it the same? All men are brothers. Is that basically a protest song of the 18th century, or is it something more transcending because it's simply referring to the Lord coming down?
What we said before, when we said, that the socialists take over égalité and so on, they did take over the content in a certain way, but it is now a different class which makes these demands, And the critical remark that the people who invented these ideas really betrayed them. As soon as they were in power, they forgot they meant their freedom now, but no equality, no brotherhood and sisterhood and so on. But it's, in a certain sense, you could argue they are the same ideas, but they are now used by completely different people, not the third estate, but the fourth estate. Now, to translate this into our situation and our present music, what it would be like. So we are just at the end of the neoliberal counter-revolution. Nothing evolutionary whatsoever. How is it now, And this commodification and acceptance, by the culture industry and so on, of course they will not accept revolutionary music, or they will neutralize it in a certain. They will castrate it.
By commodification. By commodification.
Yeah,
this year, whatever revolutionary this year becomes a commodity next year, and it's sold in coals.
Yeah, exactly. So.
But it does it to all music, because Beethoven sold in coals now.
Well, again, but this is not a time. You can't take classical music and market it. What you would call art, what is it? It's not something high art versus popular art. It's not high art, what he calls it. Something
high
else.
Culture is what Marcuse calls it.
Yeah, it's something else that Adorno calls it. But you can't market it. It doesn't ever fit into society as a commodity. It can't be done. Like I said with jazz, that's where free jazz almost killed jazz because it could not be marketed. You couldn't put it on the radio. You couldn't put it into a commercial. You couldn't do anything with it. It was for musicians. And the only reason jazz could survive is by recommodification. Now, his point is, every time you come up with new popular music, at one day it's revolutionary, the next day it's a damn commodity. And it's bought and sold within, the whole stream of the market and the culture industry. It becomes a commodity. That way we can listen to the music on 100.9, the oldie stuff, and listen to all the good, revolutionary music of the 60s or whatever, and we sing along to it, and it's just nostalgia now. It's just that money.
But that's what people do to classical music now.
Yeah, but what does it mean that music becomes classical? That would be interesting, as soon as music becomes classical, it means it is now accepted by everybody. And it may not be exactly, therefore it may not be revolutionary anymore, or critical, or whatever.
But the people that are performing Beethoven and Bach, these people are performing in giant concert halls to other people. I mean, it's not like this stuff is underground. This is happening right out in the open. You're talking about now? No, then.
Well, then, yeah, okay, fine. But I mean, when you had Beethoven in the families of the aristocracy, and they would ask him to play, and he refused to play. He said, "I'm not a damn servant." You know what I mean? If there's tons of kings, there's only one Beethoven. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean that's the interesting thing, that the class which is really departing may like the music, and that those for whom it was written, namely the low bourgeoisie or whatever, didn't understand a word of it. But isn't that something like Brecht, for instance? It's the bourgeoisie which listens to Brecht. It was our K college which played Brecht all the time. And our university is much more working class university than K college is, So one should think we should have been the first one and so on. But we weren't, So there are all kinds of paradoxes between the superstructure and the base structure. And if there's anything in Marxism which has to be somehow looked at again, is, if that really works that way, because you have the first new logic, Hegel's logic, is the bourgeois product, but the Aristotelian logic went through slavery, it went through the whole feudal system, in the Muslims and the Europeans, and only late in the bourgeois period suddenly came a new logic, the dialectical logic, which then served more a movement which wants to overthrow the bourgeoisie, while the bourgeoisie, let's think of the Vienna School and Carnap and so on, they go back to the Aristotelian thing, So that is, the most important thing in the education system, that in the Great Depression, the last Depression, we repressed dialectical thinking. That means, that the same superstructure element can go through a lot of changes in the base structure, and then comes up, really late, and then is repressed again. Because if we had people who have been educated in dialectical thinking, they would think, for instance, what has happened? This neoliberal counter-revolution won, the Soviet socialism broke down, a few decades later, capitalism breaks down, they federalize now, over there they try to find a new form of socialism. At the same time, the most advanced capitalist country takes up $1 trillion from the most communistic state of China and so on. There is a dialectical movement going on, obviously, which, by the way, may mean non-violent transition from the old bourgeois system into a new one, whatever its name may be, But there is definitely, there is a movement in contradictions going on, with the intermezzo of the war against terrorism and so on, which is very quiet at the moment, Guantanamo Bay is dissolved, and there are things blow up in Iraq here and there, but at the moment I think it's just...
the administration doesn't use that word anymore.
Yeah, right. Well, that is called language regulation, and that's a pre-fascist type of thing. That's a very sad. They change all kinds of words. Blackwater has changed its name too. So this guy, the School of the Americas, has changed its name. They changed the name in order to disappear for a little while. But let's keep on, to this. The music belongs to the superstructure, and then there is the base structure where the revolutionary change should take place. When the bourgeoisie overthrew the feudal lords, it was reflected in the music like Beethoven and so on. When it becomes classical, I think something happens to it. Then it is generally accepted, and it loses its class character, and it becomes something universal for all people, and so on and so on. And so we can play, the universities, by the way, play it all the time, Beethoven and so on. And the others, if you take the opposite, proletarian music, is that what people hear all the time in their cars, But you may call that elitism too, but, the question is here that one sees it in class terms, and the cultural development,
But
if that is, elitism, I would have to clarify what this concept means in all of
maybe
this.
it would be better said in how Bourdieu says it's mainly it's the domain of either the intellectuals or some form of cultured bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
Workers don't go to hear classical music.
Yeah. I mean, we could see what do the students turn on when they are in the car, I mean, whenever I take over for care and my car, my station has disappeared, I have to look, again, I have to go through the whole damn thing in order to find something which has Beethoven, Because Kern has some kind of proletarian music all the time. But if you say this, then it sounds very much like elitism and so on. But, great music has been bourgeois music. And the socialists have not produced anything which is on the level of bourgeois music. And then in Adorno you find strange things. Adorno was proud of his noble background or whatever, and some of the girlfriends all had that fun in front of it. So, and he thought he was part of it. He thought he was Napoleon and so. But in real progressive people, you can find very strange things sometimes. I mean, he wanted to have the good life too, and they made sometimes fun of them. They predicted the going under of the world, but they did it in wonderful hotels with swimming pools and so on. So, yeah, all kinds of contradictions. Therefore, one has to hold on, to fundamental issues, concepts, in order to be able to think through. When you have all these very complicated, differentiated things going on. And so when we say Beethoven died, he died already in the Restoration. That's what it's called, the Restoration period, But and Hegel would be blamed, that part of his philosophy is already Restoration philosophy. So he put up a little maypole tree or whatever in Tübingen and celebrated the Great Revolution. But then he heard about the terror, which took place, and so he got horrified. And shortly before his death in 1831, when he heard about the Commune, in Paris, he was frightened stiff. His bourgeois soul was shivering, And he wrote some kind of an article about reform laws for England, which the king forbid, because he wanted to have good relations with England. So it was not even published. So, but in Hegel, definitely you can see traces of restoration. But translated for us now, the student rebellion or revolution did not work. They combined in France, they marched with the workers. I think here the student movement had no connection with the workers whatsoever. And the consequences, what you have when the revolution fails, things get worse afterwards, because the challenged powers will increase the police force and will be fortified more when the next attack happens and so on. So, but the objective and now international things, the G20s, that is now cosmic. The whole thing, the capitalistic system breaks down all over the place. Not only in this or that country, and that's why they come together there too. And on the streets you have the masses, capitalism has not worked, down with the capitalists, someone takes a chair in the Bank of London and so on. So this is undirected, type of anger and rage, but all the G8 which met before, they also had the trouble. There was always this anti-capitalistic thing, but it is universalizing, And for the future, socialism in one country cannot really work. As long as the capitalist system is stabilized, they will isolate them and they will screw in their markets and so on. So it has to be universal. That means capitalism has to break down in all countries at the same time. And it does that right now. So, it's interesting to listen to how that struggle goes from day to day, including with the Fox people, because they reflect the thing. They will, shout hysterically about socialism and nationalization and federalism, where that leads to, it's the most left-wing government we ever had. The exaggerations show the truth better than the more measured type of people like CNN. Okay, do you have any other question there for us?
I think we did fairly well.
Did we cover the whole thing?
Pretty much. You sort of covered a little bit of number one. Does did the critical theory live up to the 11th thesis on Feuerbach or not? And I think you at least touched on it in. So the student movement rebukes Adorno and Horkheimer for not asking.
The 11th thesis there. The whole thing, philosophers have always interpreted the world, and it's time to change it. There, Adorno would say, maybe it is time to interpret it again, because the Praxis has run into the ground, in a certain sense. So, first of all, the workers, joined Hitler, or a majority, and he let 3 million workers into the Soviet Union. They all most of them were workers. And that was a big failure. And then comes it in socialism in one country, but it becomes brown and whatever you want to call it, Rudi Dutschke, this whatever was called in white fascism or whatever. It was not that what Marx or even Lenin had in mind, and so on. So the failure, and then, but Habermas said, by the way, that does not mean that socialism is now down or that people will not talk about it. So, and now this whole new situation. We knew always under this Islamic thing that the real problem will really be one country in South America become socialistic. So just the head of Brazil, the government of Brazil, the president was on, and he is a worker, Yeah, right. And very reasonable things, in a very simple type of a language, but very refreshing and so on. So you have in Chile, you have a woman there who had been tortured by Pinochet, and she is in the government now. So you have one country after the other turning in one form or the other into socialism. I think
capitalistic socialism.
Salvador.
It depends now.
Yes.
Yeah, the old socialists came in again. They are back to it as well.
Except for Israel.
So now,
except for Israel. Right.
Well, as far as capitalism is concerned, depends what was wrong with capitalism is the private ownership, of the whole thing, that they, defrauded people, and stole everything from them, and so on. But a socialistic corporation, has to have profit. Even the kibbutz capitalism, the kibbutz, whatever they have, a glass factory or whatever, it has to make a profit. You cannot just produce so many windows as you just need. You do have to exchange and so on.
But it's not a private
the question is who appropriates the profit, and therefore accumulates continually and therefore gains political power as well. This guy now in Alaska there, who got money from the oil people, right, and he's 86 years old or whatever, and the court let him go in terms of a formality, because the prosecutors were nasty and didn't share the information with the defense. So and because he's old, what kind of justice is this now? He was let go free, but it's
old enough, you won't have to.
Yeah, that's right.
But it was Obama's Justice Department which let that Republican go, and now they blame the Justice Department for the corruption or whatever. This is a new thing in the people there on the far right. They make saldo mortalis recently. So okay, so anything. So that as far as the last Adorno thing there is concerned. So have we clarified this?
Yeah,
capitalism. So I think what Adorno, if he had lived, he could have made a contribution to develop a critical theory of economics, which does not exist. But it was not, a totally planned type of a society, but it was not a free enterprise one neither. So what would that be in between, And in our conditions, it would mean that we go on now to federalize, and maybe down to the level of $250,000. So that means the low bourgeois free sector will remain, all kinds of pizza people who will fry pizzas and so on and so on. So, but all the things like the Montan Union in Europe, that means iron and steel and electricity and windmills or whatever, that will all be, will all be in public hands. So it will be, instead of privatization, it will be deprivatization again, just the other way around. And hopefully, the crisis can be managed that way so that the private sector can really remain, because that would probably be desirable, but not the big banks, not the big industries. So, he fired the boss of General Motors, I think, and he would probably fire them all. But these are not the owners, But he fired the CEOs, and the CEOs are not the owners. So the owners remain anonymous against the feudal lords, who always were riding out with their horse and a big flag. That's me, the from so-and-so. The bourgeois is hiding all the time. Even locally here, the Abjan walked around in tennis shoes and Volkswagen and so on. So they have a bad conscience, and therefore they remain, somewhat in the background. So what to do with them, if the government owns 40, 50, 60% of the stocks, it practically owns the whole thing. If they want to leave the titles to them or will take the titles away from them too, it depends how deep the crisis go and how far they have to go. And one must not personalize it. That's Obama or whatever. Whoever would come in would have to do similar things, because it is, the capital movement demands it. So that is the base structure. When we talk about music, that is the superstructure. And the question is, to what relationship these songs or whatever, what they have to what is going on in the real world, if you want to put it that way. The effectiveness among the consumers, how effective was the revolutionary music of Mozart and Beethoven, really? How much did it contribute that finally one country after the other became republic or whatever? Very slowly, because they were one counter-revolution after the other of Metternich and so on. And our fellow here, what's his name, under Nixon there, the Jewish fellow there, Kissinger, studied Metternich, he was a Metternich man. Metternich, Bismarck, they were both, anti-revolutionary guys, and that fit very well into this neo-conservative. Yeah, right. So one has to be careful in order to see analogies, because the class thing, when a new class breaks through, then everything is transformed. And we have this tragedy. The last bourgeois revolution was the Civil War here. That's the last time that the bourgeoisie was revolutionary, by 61, 65. And afterwards, it is continually counter-revolutionary. That means the 12 armies which we sent there against Lenin, were all slaughtered. There are still 8,000 Americans in Murmansk. We tried hard, Then they sent Hitler, and the same ruling class sent Hitler. And he almost made it, Berlin, we almost did it, but Stalingrad finished it up, and Kursk and so on. And then 1989, this was another counter-revolution. The same people who sent Hitler and the 12 armies were the same ruling class again,
But what did
and this time they won. They won.
And what did they send this time?
Well, they sent the World Bank in Paris, And that was the only thing where...
And they sent Reagan, too, and all of his missiles.
Yeah. Well, the armament, he spent about $2 trillion or whatever in armament, had something to do with it. So,
and they sent the Pope.
Reagan and the Pope.
And they sent the Pope,
Incredible.
exactly. Yeah.
That recently in Berlin, after the whole issue with the Danish cartoons of Muhammad...
Yeah.
Despite the fact that no one knew Idomeneo, Mozart's opera Idomeneo, actually had it in it, they canceled playing it because one of the final scenes, King Idomeneo cuts the heads off of Muhammad, Jesus, and Moses.
Really?
In this opera? Wow.
Absolutely. You see this is already the beginning of the bourgeoisie,
Yeah.
Shows up in the opera.
So this is Idomeneo?
Idomeneo.
I have never heard.
It was one of his earlier ones, too.
Yeah. Okay, the question is now, what happens to the bourgeoisie, my daughter called up, and how upset all these people are, And my daughter belongs to little coups, they all look the same. They had the same dress, they studied law, all of them, And now they are fighting quite, some of them have breast cancer already, and so they are fighting with unbelievable things, and to some extent they are admirable and they are intelligent and so on. But they were on the bourgeois way, that was their dream, to move from the low bourgeoisie, maybe, or working class, into the middle bourgeoisie. That's why they got the degree, and so on and so on. And now they're horribly disappointed, so they told me Obama is losing them all, so some of them are on Wall Street and have responsible things for some banks and firms and so on. Even that little thing that we suddenly at Western have this guy, this Brecht, and they don't even take money for it, because one charge was always, we cannot make much money with Brecht, and suddenly they give it almost for nothing, So, little symptoms like this, what do they show about where the bourgeoisie is? It is so hard because the Americans are not aware that they have a ruling class. I mean, even when we talk about elitism, there is an elite. We do have an elite, some like dynasty, the Kennedy dynasty, but they were never a dynasty, or the Bush dynasty or whatever, They were bourgeois imitating the feudal lords, So they playing golf or horse golfing or bringing the whole castle, the stones over to the Hudson River and put the castle up like they have in England or whatever. These are all imitations, I mean, Ford was a worker, Many of these bourgeois here came from the working class and then got in control of about a few thousand of themselves there and put them under their control, and gave them $1 an hour so that they could buy their own car while they made profit from it. They produced their own car and Ford got rich from it. I mean, fantastic type. Fordism, is a fantastic type of thing. But the Americans are not aware of it. And see, one disadvantage is that their wage is not directed to the right address. And what then happens is that their anger goes against their own people. So there was a guy yesterday who cut the head off of his 5-year-old little sister and killed another brother, and so on, and the mother broke down, and one thing after the other, day after day. There was a psychoanalyst who studied that for the French colonialism, where he saw that the less people could get against the feudal or against the colonial master, the more they went against themselves. So it would be, I think, it would be important to show that anger, the right address where it has to go. Otherwise, it goes against the people themselves on the family level and so on. They butcher each other in the process,
That's what the Arabs always say about the Israelis, that if you really want to get rid of these Israelis, just leave them alone.
Yeah.
They're Jews. They'll fight against each other.
Yeah.
Should we take a break?
Yeah. So, this was paper day. Okay, let's make a little march. We will have, I've told you this, we have a final test then at the end. And you have to give it back to me on the 20th, and I give it to you on the 13th or something like that, right? Is that it? And then there is this reading thing there, and we will have the two ways to do it again. You can concentrate on your critical theorists, the first, second, third, fourth generation, or you can answer the questions. I will give you questions again. If you take the second option, then we would have for an A, we would have the two readings there. So that is the thing. Now let me just go through this, what I've built up here. Just that we don't forget, the whole outline. What I have here is the Karl Otto Appel. People don't talk much about him, but Habermas would say in the next generation that they have learned most from him. He is responsible that Habermas could make the linguistic change. He makes the connections with Peirce and with Mead and with Chomsky and so on, with the whole linguistic movement. He brings us home in a certain sense. He brings us into our own territory, cultural territory. Karl Otto Appel is the same generation as Habermas, and I participated in seminars, and the two worked beautifully together, Habermas and Otto. And Habermas is the more charismatic one and the world-known one, but in a very quiet way. He also with the, what is it, Piaget, he makes a connection with Piaget and with the other, the fellow who comes from Piaget, and these ideas of stages, in which we develop psychologically, stage 1 to 6, and so on. So that is the bridge builder, Karl or Appel, and so what you have here, the title, for instance, of one of these things, language analysis, semiotic, hermeneutics, and Reika was the one who did that. She went into the whole semiotics thing and wrote her dissertation about this. But then more important is this thing here, a transition from toward a post-conventional type of morality. So this is the whole project in the West, and it's important that when we go into little things that we also keep. I mean, the American genius is to look at the trees, and the European genius is to look at the forest. It would be nice if we get those two things together. So when we look at the trees, then we want to remember the forest. If we look at the forest, we want to remember the trees. Both is very important. So in terms of the dialectical notion, it's to be concerned with the singular on one side, and on the other side not to lose the universal, or when you are concerned with the universal, then you lose the particular and the singular, and so on. So the question that we get this together. Now, behind that there is, of course, a huge project. They are Kantians, Mead was a Kantian, Peirce was a Kantian, and Chomsky, they all come from the Kantian tradition, not from the Hegelian one. And Habermas, and the Frankfurt school people always moved back between Hegel and Kant, back and forth. The reason for that is that Kant is the real critical guy. He has made this Copernican turn, from the object to the subject, and the constitution of the object by the subject, and things like that in terms of idealism. But then when you go through with Kant, you are not left with anything in terms of a positive meaning of life, of a positive metaphysics, that's called. So Kant demolished the proofs of God and no answer to the theodicy problem and so on. So that leaves you, that what always the ideal was of philosophy to help us to find the meaning or the truth. The truth has been completely abandoned by the whole positivistic wing. They leave that generously to philosophy or to religion or to art. So what you have in the real scientific enterprise, or the dissertations which you have to write and so on, they want to have protocol sentences. And these protocol sentences follow one truth theory, and that's the correspondence theory. That means your protocol sentences must correspond to facts and data in relationship in the real world. So now what the project is, all ethics, so the conventional morality had all a theological basis. That means up to Kant, all morality in the West, and I think also in the East, was religiously, was theologically grounded, which meant in very simple terms, God has not only created the world, but He gave us also a certain code, the Ten Commandments, and the Holy Quran has this, the Torah has it, the New Testament has it, sometimes radicalized like the Sermon on the Mount, but everything was based in the Creator God, the Lord of the universe, and the simple thing was, if you follow this law of your religion, you will be rewarded, you will go to heaven, and if you negate it, then you will go to hell. That was a tremendous motivator. And the greatest burden which that secularization attempt from Kant to us has is this, that the motivation thing. So even if we have the Kantian ethics and we have the categorical imperative, or we have here what Appel calls the a priori of the universal communication community, and we know then that we could have abortion or not to have abortion or whatever, then there is still the question, why should I do this or should not do that? So why should I not take the wife of my friend whom I love, and his marriage is not so stable anyway, and she is not so really happy with him, and Freud, as a secular man would say, look, the world is full of suffering, don't add more suffering to it, for yourself, for the partner, for your wife, for her children, and so on and so on. But is that a real motivator, or would not people say, look, I'm 30 years old, life is half over, and I want to get something out of it, and so I don't care really the suffering, that is the price one has to pay for happiness. So that means you use the happiness, Schopenhauer would say, you use the happiness, you instrumentalize the happiness of the other for your own happiness, sacrifice the happiness of the other for your own happiness, which for Schopenhauer was the original sin. And if you then could transform yourself and you could suffer with the suffering as they suffer, and you could also be happy with the other as they are happy, then you would be redeemed. That's a secularization of Buddhism and secularization of Christianity. So, nevertheless, from Kant on, this is done. And why Hegel always comes back again, and why there is one Hegel renaissance after the other, is the following thing. Hegel makes the promise, because Kant was his teacher, that people can be as critical as Kant and they can still have a positive metaphysics. And that is, of course, unbelievably tempting. You can be as critical as Kant and you can at the same time have a meaning in life and something to hold on to and so on. But then when people then read Hegel long enough, then they ask the epistemological question of Kant again. How the hell does he know this? That there are these positive structures which he has in his logic already, and which he finds everywhere in nature and in society and in history and so on. And then people go back to Kant. So all 4 generations of the Frankfurt School always make that circle. They go to Kant, and then from Kant they come to Hegel, and then they go back to Kant again, and so they are circling around. That cannot go on forever. They will have to make the decision. So overall, with the retreat of religion, and religion is retreating, there is the following alternative, which they stand for. On one side, they know secularization cannot be stopped. And what people now in Notre Dame, how they react to the president, the stem cell and abortion and so on, there is no way that the secularization can be stopped. People will not go back to the natural law of the Stoics and of the Catholic Church and so on. No matter how nice it is, and certainly it was a great culture. The Arabs had a great culture by the year 1000, and then the West had a great culture in the high Middle Ages and so on. But this is over now, that we cannot go back there. And we have all these Catholics who would like to go back to Trent, and never knows where they want to go back. It's not possible. We have Arabs and we have Jews who want to go to the empire paradigm of David and Solomon, and Israel stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates and so on. This can only create unbelievable unhappiness. There is no way in the historical process to go back. When I was in Ioannina and I taught the professors of the University of Ioannina, which is north of Greece, and they asked me this unbelievable question, which I have never forgotten, If the Germans had known their philosopher Hegel and his history adequately, would they have done the Hitler thing? And I would say, no, they wouldn't. Why? Because it was too late. The Germans had their empire, and there was no way that their third one could be built. The Romans had their empire, and it cannot come back. And I would say, even with the success of the Chinese have their empires, they have their dynasties. They will never move again to the front of the evolutionary process. On the other hand, the Slavic world, where Dustin and I, we travel back and forth between those two worlds, and the American world, still have an evolutionary potential because they never did anything. That is the task of the Russians, for instance, and the Slavs was, and this is very great of actuality, they protected the little peninsula, Europe, against the Asian attacks. And only twice with Genghis Khan and Attila did they break through. But how many times did they try, where the Russians put themselves in between? And therefore, you have to, when I go to St. Petersburg and I would say, you are not really Europeans or whatever, then I would hurt these people in the depths of their soul, because their whole existence consisted in that, to defend this peninsula down there. So, in politics, it's unbelievable, but a little word, and they feel it because they wait already that this will be done to them. And on the other hand, if you recognize that, they will bloom and they will be very happy. So, but what I mean is they have not done anything else which would be their own product. Peter the Great went to Holland and he learned everything and he westernized and so like China westernized. I mean, Marx is a westerner. and they took it from the West and so on. So, but what the Slavic world and the American world still has to do, and I mean both continents, is to produce their own, because we have an English language, we have an economic system from Europe. I mean, 99% of all cultural items are from Europe. So we still have to come into our own, and in that sense, I think we have a tremendous evolutionary potential. But we have to get out of the stranglehold of the present system now, and that's where we are now. And the fighting every day, in the news and so on, with the back and forth and so on, between the Roosevelt liberals and the other liberals, that shows, how the snake frees itself from its skin. The time has come that we free ourselves from that skin, which will set our potential free, or the snail, which has to abandon its house and in order to build a new one, which will be bigger for new potentials. And these are the frightening thing which my daughter today, not only is my little grandchild had just an operation of the spine, there's great pain, but also she has been fired. She was a lawyer for Reader's Digest, and Reader's Digest shrinking, and now she got a new job, for another corporation which was just founded, but she has to travel and 3 children and so on. But what my friends, who have firms in Wall Street and so on, it's a horrible learning process, and a frightening thing. It's the same frightening thing which a snake has when it has no skin for some time, or which a little snail has, which has no house for some time, or what a city-state has, who is overpopulated and has to broaden the walls, and for some time it will not have walls, and it will, people can attack at that moment, and so on. It's a very weak moment. I think that this is the moment which we have as a country. It is the skin, the ideological skin, the philosophical skin, which we were used to, is cracking. And we have, but that one is not only pessimistic about this. One must be pessimistic about the capitalist system. It will go. And the faster we know that, and will not try again and to rescue it, and only get deeper and deeper strangled in the old skin, so that we do move out of it and to gain this fight, so in order to set our evolutionary forces in power. But whenever you fly over this territory, what have these people done, for 400 years? They had farms, and they read the Bible, and they procreated, and they fed there, particularly in winter. What the hell did they do in winter, And there was nothing to do. So, and this is on both continents. So I'm pessimistic about the capitalist system, but I'm very optimistic as far as the people are concerned around here. And so, nevertheless, this is what they try to do now. What the project is, and the critical theorists, all 4 generations, are part of this project. So it's a secular movement, right? They leave religion behind, the Jewish religion and so on. They are not hostile. So if somebody wants to stay a Catholic or Protestant or Muslim and so on, they say, if you honestly can do what they say to do, go to your pastor, do what your pastor says, and if you can do this, it's all right. But what if you can't? What if you have problems with this and that? Like we have so many youngsters who come from Detroit, from a Polish bourgeois family and so on, and they come and I can't believe anymore what my parents believe. There's the Sputnik, and there's ascension into heaven of Jesus and maybe of Mary, and how does all this fit together? There is Werner von Braun, the SS colonel, who is at the same time the friend of Kennedy, who brought us to the moon, and who would have brought us to Mars if we had not strangled him and had not died from cancer, and they gave him an office in the Pentagon and didn't then come out anymore. So, but this is the modern thing, and then there's the talk about ascension, and a God who is good and is almighty, and his word is a hell, is a mess, the whole theodicy problem, and so there are these tensions. Now, when these tensions are, then the Frankfurt School people would say, all 4 generations, you don't have to stay in the old thing. You can become a secular person, and you don't have to become a sex, car, and career person or a porno person or whatever. You can live a decent humanistic life. Even some of the religion, that's inverse theology, can be transferred or can be inverted. And so you would have people then, in the G20 now, where they look completely secular, and at the same time some of them are religious motivated because they have rescued some of the semiotic, semantic material and force and potential, and they carry this in the secular form. And as I said already, Dieter Hennicke may very well be a man like this who appeared completely secular, but at the same time once wrote to me when he read my German book in Germany, where I had Bonhoeffer's thing in the back, his prayer, and Dieter wrote, I pray that every day. Now Bonhoeffer was also Lutheran, so there he was faithful to his Lutheran background. But I think he was somebody who had gone into secularity with the poet there, the guy whom we play there, Brecht, and he was in the bourgeois world, so he covered that up, But Brecht is an extreme form of secularization. But then even Adorno would say we can rescue Brecht in terms of an inverse theology. That means Nietzsche or Brecht or whatever rescue in their negation of the religious representations and stories and narratives and images and so on. They also rescue something in them of that truth. Also here the truth has changed its skin. The snake has crawled out of these old skins and it has moved. It's moving into another one. So that is the Apple project there. And so it goes back to the categorical imperative. It will act in such a way that your particular maxim can become the basis of a universal legislation. So ethics has always to connect the particular and the universal. Simply to say, I did what I thought was right is just a nonsense sentence. Because you have to ask, what does make something right? And what makes something right is that you find a consensus. And so they developed this categorical imperative further to that what he writes here, namely in the post-conventional thing where he argues with the a priori of the unlimited communication community, which Habermas took over, and then which the followers of Habermas up to here in the States and so they all have this in common, so that we see the outline and the strategy. And that's the a priori of the communication community, the unlimited communication community. What does that mean? I want to decide the issue like abortion. So I do not want to use religious arguments anymore. I have no word of God. I have no decalogue. I read the Bible as a fairy tale or a fable in a certain sense, a fabulous type of a fable, but nothing more. And it has no binding effects for me anymore. So what do I do now in order to decide if abortion is right or not? The people of Notre Dame or whatever, they all still have a theological background. Now, if they really believe in that or not, that's another question. Because if they want to rescue the embryo, but at the same time now send 12,000 men against the Taliban and so on, of which many of them will not come back anymore. What about all the ex-embryos? And that inconsistency, is an argument against the truth of the position. Because one other theory of truth is the consistency. And that truth theory is valid for science, and it is valid for religion as well. Religion is under the same 4 or 5 theories of truth under which science is as well. In order for religion to be true, the correspondence theory must be there. And if some statements of religion contradict what the positivist has discovered about evolution and so on, then the faith position has to shut up. Why we have to a large extent this contradiction between the two sides is that theologians again and again overstep their competence and talk about something which biologists know about and anthropologists know about, but a theologian doesn't know about it. And it can also happen that this biologist or whatever wants to interfere into the theological position, and that would be as bad. So if both sides stay in the realm of their competence, and competence is an important word there, of their language, then it would become more peaceful already. It wouldn't solve the whole thing, but it would become more peaceful and fair.
Do you mean by the second position, Dawkins and who are these guys now? Hitchens and his book Harris.
Yeah.
These sort of I guess the consensus is that they're vulgar, materialistic atheists.
Yeah, right.
Radical hard atheists.
Right.
There has not been, is not now, never will be a God.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that could say that, because they would know it.
Okay, let me see a concrete example. If we go to the Mother Courage there, in which sense has Christ, his grandmother already hated priests in Augsburg, and he inherited, it was in his genes, so to speak, to hate all priests and ministers and so on. So he did for his whole life. But it was some kind of a vulgar, one would call it vulgar atheism or whatever, that doesn't matter. The main thing, when you look concretely now, whatever piece you take, which he has, but let's take Mother Courage, There is in Mother Courage, there is a certain friendliness and kindness. She lives in a horrible situation. It's a 30-year war. She sells beer or whatever, and sometimes to the Protestant army, sometimes to the Catholic army. She doesn't even know where the hell which army it may be, and it doesn't interest her as long as business is okay. But she is brave and is alone and has no husband, and she has to pull her wagon through all of Germany while the cities are wiped out by the Protestants and the Catholics and so on. But this element, of kindness, or what was in the Christian thinking, it was connected with love, with the issue of love. And Tillich was the one who pronounced it, and Horkheimer and all the others, took it over very much. What they admired in him was in Tillich that this friendliness and this kindness and so on. So, and there are quite a lot of figures which he produced, which preserve this element of friendliness, while at the same time he would, negate all the mythology and so on. So that is what is meant. Not everything of the religions will be rescued. What cannot pass the secular discourse of the expert cultures will be forgotten. And it's good that the Inquisition is forgotten. That was a good thing. That the killing of 10 million witches is forgotten. That's a good thing. That Christians again and again wanted to get faith and power together, which is hard to do. Maybe all these things should be forgotten. Maybe things which are still here now, that the Pope has nunci everywhere, that he has a Secretary of State, maybe that should all be forgotten. Because that brought him to the thing that he celebrated his 81st birthday in the White House and shook the hand of a mass murderer. We had all these discussions after Hitler that no decent person should shake the hand of a politician who had the blood of 10,000 of people on him and so on. But if you cannot go to Washington and play the whole game there, and then in the airport when he comes, the president, and they know I will not shake your hands and so on. You have to stop that long before. And the martyrs like Delp and so on, the Jesuit who died in the Kreisauer Kreis and was hanged, he wrote these letters to the church. Give up that diplomatic thing there. Just follow the New Testament. And Fromm would say, convert to the New Testament. Be simple. What would he have done then, the Pope? He would have talked about the Jews, He would not have thought, what does that diplomatically mean, and so on, and miscalculated all over the place, So that would be a thing, about becoming secular. Those who want to become religious, Catholic Church, if you want to stay, convert to the New Testament and become simple again and follow your Sermon on the Mount and that and forgive up all the nunci. But it goes backward. Under Reagan, suddenly the United States, which had refused nunciates all the time, took one and sent an ambassador over there. So it is really going backward, the whole thing.
We're just getting close to 9.
Okay, yeah, we want to do that. So, what I want to close this up there. If we take that secular principle, remember, it is Frankfurt School is a secular type of an enterprise, no matter how Jewish these people were. And so there is no theological basis anymore. Horkheimer holds on to the theological basis still. Habermas doesn't. So how do you decide a concrete thing like, say, abortion and so on? You would say we have to get a consensus. We have to get particularly the consensus of the possible victims. Who are the possible victims? The 1.5 million abortions every year. The bambinos, little fetuses, are the victims. They cannot talk. So an advocate has to talk for them. The advocate would say, you put me into life, 3 months later you annihilate me again. This is not a very rational behavior. Or the advocate would say, I have to go up in the north side of Kalamazoo. That's no life, aboard me. It's better to be dead than to live up and go up in the north side, on the north side, and so on. So that means what decides in the end is this a priori of the unlimited communication community, and unlimited means that the potential victims are particularly one gets their consensus. Another example, the weapon system. You know that Obama will probably not go through with the shield in Czech Republic, and the Russians already have planned, a counter movement in Lithuania. So if he takes that back, they will take that back, and that would relax the tension. He just talked with the Russians today, I think the president of the Russian Federation. So, but if we say, we want to have that shield of Reagan, I think, initiated this, it would cost, 100 million people's life on the West Coast or 100 people on the East Coast, wherever the rockets are coming from. We would have to get the consensus of these 100 million, say, are you willing to die so that the other 200 million Americans will live? If we get their consensus, we could go ahead. It would be, the norm would be all right. If we don't get their consensus, we could not do it. So in this case, you do not need any theological presupposition anymore. It is formal, but you can apply these formal concepts to all these new material things. But there remains, and none of us would admit this, and honest too, there remains the motivation thing. Because even after we make a decision about abortion or this shield or so, this is still the question, are we motivated enough? Do we have the political will or whatever to do what has to be done? Like if we find out, the President Bush was just charged by a Spanish court for war crimes, and that will happen now again and again. Will the world community or will we have the will to put these people on trial? Not out of revenge, but in a post-conventional, in a post-metaphysical sense. And a post-metaphysical theory of punishment has only one purpose, namely to prevent that the thing will be repeated. So that we, 2 or 3 administration down, that not somebody will take the precedence of this criminal administration and will repeat it and will do even worse. And the same way also for the trustees, the capitalists who were responsible for the wealth of the nation, and they failed miserably and by selfishness and so on, that this will not be repeated again. That would be the only purpose of punishment, and not revenge and not balancing of the all the metaphysical systems of the equilibrium of the moral world or whatever. That's all metaphysics. But in a post-metaphysical, post-religious way, how can one argue? And also religious people have to take that seriously, because they are simply not understood anymore. Because what the secular people say already about stem cell removal is, you will think they're with, from the birth on, for fertilization on, this is a human being, this is metaphysics, they say. And when they say this is metaphysics, then they say this is not an argument for us. And so if religious people want to argue in a public discourse, they have to find another way to argue, since the metaphysical or religious statements will not hold the water anymore. If they want to get a majority and want to introduce a bill and want to get the majority to get it through, they will have to speak a secular language. Okay, let's start with that. That is Apple, and the next time we can go a little bit further. So let's start with the Scholl movie, and let's look at some scenes there.
Does everybody know who Sophie Scholl is? Remind us.
Yeah, remind us. You tell us.
Well, where was she at? She was in
München, yeah. She was a student in München. She had a fiancé who fought in Stalingrad. She came from a low middle-class background in Bavaria. She had a brother who studied with her, who was also a soldier. And they had a friend who had a family and 1 or 2 children. The friend became weak in the whole thing and frightened and wanted to compromise a little bit, but they pulled him through.
They were part of what was called the White Rose, which was
a border student movement, yeah. And it started maybe 42, 43, so when Stalingrad happened, the students became suspicious that Hitler was really such a military genius because he made such a mess. of things, and so rebellion started among the students. And all the crimes which they committed was to make flyers, and they threw these flyers through the University of Munich, and the caretaker of the university saw them, and he pushed the whole thing, and so finally they were guillotined. I saw a guillotine. They were put on a table and put the head under the knife, and then the head was cut off. Very old, and they even walked with these high hats there like they did to the French Revolution. They imitated it and went together to the execution and put her on the and their brother too, and the other one.
And Roland Freisler's in this too. The communist turned fascist judge.
Right.
Oh, okay.
He's the one that
We've already seen him.
It was called Volksgerichtshof. It was called People's Court. It was in Leipzig. But when I was in Leipzig, I asked my taxi driver. I said, "Do you know over there that was People's?" And he didn't know anymore. It's very strange. He was hit by an American bomb, and he was taken care of by a Protestant nun whose brother he had sentenced to death. She was with him in the last hours in the Orleans and took care of him.
Would you like your check?
Yeah, can I have a check?
It's in German, so you'll have to.
So you have to, right. You have to
read a little bit.
Read it underneath. Can you turn it around? Maybe that reads it out. Now, what music is this?
It is in Deutschland they call it.
I think it was half forbidden.
It was forbidden.
Yeah.
It would be called.
Only sometimes. Only sometimes. Sometimes they were open.
It was the American degenerate music.
Okay, go.
It's the only English music.
Is it loud enough for all of us?
I think it's louder.
It's only in German. You don't need to.
So these are the girls. They're supposed to be the girls of my school.
That's Julia. Yeah, she's a very popular actress now in Germany. Well, on the left.
So that should show you that she was a normal, lively girl. No matter material. How are you?
Smart.
Smart, yeah.
Very disgusted.
Achso. Kommt los jetzt. Vor dem Jahr. Da haben sie nochmal angerufen. Sag ich, hat er sich wieder geholt? Das hätten wir nicht so anstellen lassen.
Hans is her brother.
Was ich mir vergessen.
Hans dates the block. Smart guy.
Yeah. I think he was in Venice, right?
Yeah, he was studying medical doctor.
And of course the German government paid for it.
Yeah, let's go work on the Eastern Front.
Yeah, right.
Can you imagine like an internship in the middle of a war zone? Basically what it was.
That is Munich. Now she meets, I think, the conspirators who made the flyers, printed flyers. Was the underground.
Das läuft da.
That was a dangerous thing what they did there.
Erschüttert steht unser Volk vor dem Untergang der Männer von Stalingrad.
So it was 43. Stalingrad was the beginning of 43.
Verantwortungslosen Tod und Verderben lässt.
Sondern die Kreuz bestimmt ist.
So that's the flyer. They have even a little printing press. But notice they are not workers. The resistance, the working class was almost still. Up to the end. First World War, the workers were always in the end. Second World War, nobody. Bourgeoisie, the nobility did the assassination attempt. 43rd assassination attempt, of which only 1 or 2 were done by workers.
43 attempts, second work?
Yeah, July 1944 was the 43rd one.
Providence was with them, though.
Yeah, Providence was with them. That's what he said all the time.
Wie der Aufstand der Studenten, neulich im Deutschen Museum. Da war es fast soweit. Gerade deswegen ist bei dieser Dach mal Ausstufe 1, Hans. Und auch unsere Frau überall draußen anmelden. Hans hat
They hope that God and the other people would rise to
Es gibt doch keine
this calculation.
Nachts was an die Wände zu schreiben. Ist schon gefällig. Aber am helllichen Tag mit diesen Flugblättern in die Uni. Schreibst du. Jetzt müssen wir was machen. Jetzt bringen wir die Stadt in Bewegung. Gerade jetzt nachschlagen. Dann findet doch die Uniform aufspitzeln. Wenn die Bolschewisten kommen, dann erwischen sie die Stadt bitte wenigstens gleich auf einen Haufen. Ich würde mir selbst an deiner Stelle nicht wünschen, dass der Russe vor ihm ankommt. Du hast doch die Bolschewisten am meisten.
So the Americans, they wish the Americans would come first then. Most people did.
Ich gehe während der Vorlesung rein, dass keiner in der Halle ist. Dann bin ich sofort wieder draußen, vorne rein, hinten raus. So was kein Sinn. Philipp.
Because they held up the
Ich übernehme die Verantwortung.
So it's her brother who was the driving force.
Mit dem Freund sind wir jetzt durch Schwaben laufen.
Nämlich.
Hans, ich halte es nicht für richtig, dass Sophie da
Wenn
irgendwo...
eine Kontrolle kommt, dann haben es Frauen leichter.
Tricky,
Sie hat recht.
cunning little woman person.
So. Abnahmschluss.
Now they go to the university and throw that stuff there. That's why they were greeted.
Nein, das machen wir uns nicht von mir.
Also gleich morgen.
Die Nazis warten auf mich.
Said this paper that would expose 300,000 senseless deaths might make for some uproar or some...
That's what they hope for.
Some sort of student rebellion or something.
But you know, you have to be sure which stratum of society will listen to you, you know. And the workers did not listen, and the bourgeoisie didn't listen. So, interesting.
Meinst du da? Ja.
But the students were all paid for by the state too.
Yeah, right.
Study.
And they will, in the Chrysler will say this to him. You have been paid by the state, you know, and what are you doing to the state, you know? We were all paid. That means he had leave of absence from the front in order to do the medical studies and then serve the army again.
Stamps.
Yeah, they sent unbelievable amounts of letters around.
Liebe Lisa, lass mir gerade das Forellenquintett vorspielen. Spürte sich in diesem Ding von Schubert Lüfte und Düfte. Von dem ganzen Jubel der Vögel, der ganzen Kreatur. Die Wiederholung des Lebens des kaltes, zahlendes Wasser.
No, Schubert, the music.
Wo es kein Ende entzücken. Was
You
ist
can
euch
hear Schubert too here from our universities.
Herzlich deine Sophie.
Die Mutter noch Marmelade hat, die Marken gibt's nur noch Steckrübensirup.
Everybody had a card there and little stamps on it, and then you get so much butter, so much coffee, and then so on.
Hast du nicht genug?
I think I never talked that rough. She never sounded so harsh.
Aber ich will ja von gegenüber.
Ja.
These two were very brave in the courtroom then. Psychologically, that was an awful pressure. No movie can reproduce choose, the culture of pleasure.
Like Jason Bourne's about to go and kill somebody and they don't even know it. Just sneaking around something. Yeah. He appropriated the red from the communists. They're terrible. Right.
Between the lecture time, so nobody's out, so that when students come out of the classroom, they will find the pieces.
So Western's East Hall looks like.
Morgen, wir gehen rüber in die Nervenklinik. Kommt ihr mit? Soll ich wieder holen? Ich komme dann noch. Jetzt komm.
Socialism started and was the city of the movement. That's where Hitler also probably made the attack to take over the state. 1923. It had two communist revolutions. Judge
were all in class learning the theory, and they were engaged in praxis.
Sie waren im Psychologischen Institut.
Nichts, Sie haben Flugblätter oben runtergefressen. Ist doch lächerlich.
Los, lassen Sie ihn los. Ich habe das Papier dort runtergeworfen.
So, das wird jetzt angezeigt. Beide mitkommen. Beide mitkommen. Das hat Folgen. Auch hier an meiner Universität, glauben Sie mir. Erschüttert steht das Volk vor dem Untergang. Herein! So viele. Das ist unfassbar. Sind das alle? Ja. Wegtreten. Schmidt, Sie schreiben einen Bericht. Wir kriegen auch die rotblickigen Kleid. Der Student hat das. Noch ein Schubplatz. Hergehen. Oder wollen Sie, dass ich Gewalt anwenden lasse?
Also cool.
Ja, das gehört alles dazu. Das sind die beiden vorläufig Festgenommenen. Das ist die Schmähschrift. Ich habe die beiden. Können Sie sich ausmessen?
That's the Gestapo.
They all had national ID cards?
Passport.
Passport?
Fräulein Sophia Magdalena Scholl.
Ja.
Magdalena.
Und Herr Hans Fritz Scholl. Ja. Sie sind Geschwister?
Ja.
Das schwache Geschlecht. 21 Jahre.
He even has some sympathy.
Soll das der Widerstand gegen das Großdeutsche Reich
Out of the whole thing, but he could.
Der junge Mann hat in meinem Beisein versucht, dieses Papier zu zerreißen. Das hat mir ein fremder Kommilitone in die Hand gedrückt. Und ich wollte ihn vernichten, damit er mich nicht belastet.
Pretty good sophist.
Gehört dieser Koffer Ihnen?
Ja.
Abführen.
From such a young age, they're
Ich habe alle Aussicht, dass die Universität bis auf weiteres abgeschiedenes bleibt. Es verlässt auch niemand vom Lehrkörper oder aus der Verwaltung des Hauses. Jawohl. Ich weiß selbstverständlich auch.
He's just an underling. He's waiting for the master. He loves his master.
Look at that. That's the master.
There he is, yeah. That's why the people were fighting already of the title. Staatspolizei.
State police.
So he was worried. Rightly so.
Los geht's.
It's like in the confessional.
Yeah, it's a priest that sent you to death.
Yeah.
I sent you to damnation.
Civic City don't talk word indeed. 10 Hail Marys, good exposition.
Scholl, Sophia Magdalena aus Ulm.
Good Catholic name.
Geboren am 9.5.1921 in Feuchtenberg, evangelisch.
No.
Vater?
Robert Scholl. Er war Berufsbürgermeister in Feuchtenberg.
Ausbildung zur Kinderschwester abgeschlossen?
Ja.
Immer noch mit Zweitwohnsitz, wohnhaft in München 23, Französischstraße 13, Gartenhaus bei Schmidt?
Ja.
Vorgestellt?
Nein.
Sie haben gegenüber dem Hausmeister der Universität zugegeben, dass Sie diese Flugblätter hier von der Balustrade geworfen haben.
Die lagen auf dem Marmorgeländer herum. Ich habe ihnen im Vorbeigehen einen Stoß versetzt.
Oh.
Solche Späße liegen in meiner Natur. Ich habe es ja auch gleich zugegeben. Ich sehe aber ein, dass ich mit dem Hinunterstoßen der Zettel da eine Dummheit gemacht habe. Ich bereue das. Kann es aber nicht ändern.
Fräulein Scholl, die Flugblätter, die Sie in der Universität abgeworfen haben, fallen unter die Kriegs- und der Strafrechtsverordnung. Wollen Sie nachlesen, was auf Hochverrat und Feindbegünstigung steht?
Ich habe damit nichts zu tun.
Gefängnis? Zuchthaus? Oder Todesstrafe?
Ich habe damit wirklich nichts zu tun.
Walter has one of those too, Rudy. Walter has one of those. You got the coat and the cigarette.
Yeah. Right.
And the hat.
Nein, danke.
I tell him all the time.
I tell him too, and then he yells at me.
Gelegentlich.
Just frightened.
We do, with the coat.